The galaxy had always been a place of unspoken peace. The stars hung in a delicate balance, each species existing in their own corners of space, exchanging knowledge and trade. But not much more. The vastness of the universe held its mysteries and its dangers, and the civilizations that lived among the stars learned to survive through quiet alliances and the occasional skirmish. But all of that changed one fateful day when the Draxari arrived. No one saw them coming at first. The shadows simply stretched across the sky, vast and unyielding like the deep of space itself. The first signs were whispers across the communications networks of multiple star systems, strange energy readings flashing across the radar. As ships in the outer sectors went silent, no distress signals, no warnings, just a sudden dead silence that made the entire galaxy hold its breath. It wasn't long before the message arrived. A voice that wasn't quite human filled the void of the interstellar frequencies, a voice that resonated with authority and malice. Every word like the thunder before a storm. "We have arrived. Your civilizations are nothing before us. You will submit, or you will perish." The message repeated in every language known across the stars, and every one of them delivered the same cold promise: extinction. At first the galaxy believed it to be a trick, a hoax, some new form of propaganda. But as the days turned to weeks and more systems went silent, the truth began to sink in. The Draxari were not a threat, they were an unstoppable force. They arrived with fleets so massive that entire planets were swallowed by their shadows, their ships capable of cutting through the strongest shields and armor like a knife through cloth. No one knew where they had come from or how they had amassed such power, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the inevitable sweep of their advance. The reports came in from every corner of the galaxy as whole species fell under their grasp. Entire civilizations were reduced to dust. As the Draxari moved with methodical precision, their fleets descended upon each planet and wiped them clean of resistance. Those who survived were left to kneel before their new masters. Those who dared to resist found themselves eradicated with no mercy. Their technology was unmatched, their soldiers ruthless, their will unbreakable, and across every star system, the same message echoed through the communication lines: humanity has fallen. The news spread like wildfire. The humans, the species that had once been seen as insignificant compared to the other races of the galaxy, had failed to defend themselves. They were weak, their technology crude, their numbers small. The Draxari had wiped them out in the blink of an eye, and now their extinction served as a grim reminder to every other species in the galaxy that resistance was futile. The humans were gone. The galaxy moved on. But even as the news was broadcast across the stars, a small voice in the darkness whispered a different story. It came from an isolated colony at the edge of the galaxy, from a place no one had thought to look, a place that had been ignored in the chaos of the Draxari's advance. They hadn't fallen, they hadn't been wiped out, they were still there, and they were not ready to give up just yet. The colony of New Hope sat at the edge of the galaxy, a remote outpost on a forgotten world. It had been established years ago as a refuge, a place where humanity could continue to thrive in peace, far from the center of galactic politics. Life on New Hope was simple: farmers, engineers, families all working to carve out a new existence on a planet far from the turmoil that often shook the rest of the galaxy. The Draxari never even bothered to acknowledge its existence in their conquest. They were too focused on the larger worlds, the more populous systems where resistance could be quashed swiftly. But that had been their mistake. When the first Draxari ships appeared in orbit above New Hope, the people had no warning. The once clear sky now darkened with the looming silhouettes of enemy ships, massive dark vessels that blocked out the light and cast long shadows over the surface. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Yet the people of New Hope did not panic. Instead, they did what humans did best. They fought. The colony had no military to speak of, just a handful of engineers and pilots with old, outdated ships and homemade weapons. The Draxari expected to find an easy target: citizens too weak to defend themselves, scattered and unorganized. But what they found was far different. The humans, though outmatched in every regard, had something the Draxari had never encountered before: determination. Mara Thompson, a former flight instructor, had been teaching young recruits how to pilot basic defense craft when the first Draxari wave arrived. The noise was deafening. Engines roaring, ground shaking as Draxari dropships began to land, and their forces spilled out across the planet's surface like locusts, overwhelming any semblance of peace. Mara had been preparing for this moment her entire life without knowing it. She wasted no time. Her voice echoed through the colony's emergency channels, rallying anyone who could fight. People who had never touched a weapon before were handed rifles, tools, and makeshift armor. A small fleet of civilian ships, led by Mara, took to the skies, engaging the Draxari forces in a desperate gambit. The human ships were outdated, their weapons primitive compared to the Draxari's advanced technology, but the element of surprise was on their side. They didn't play by the Draxari's rules. They used the planet's rough terrain and twisting canyons to their advantage, creating traps, setting ambushes, and disrupting the invaders' supply lines. Mara's flight team carried out daring raids against the invaders' command ships, striking them from unexpected angles, using every scrap of knowledge they had about the terrain. The Draxari fleet commanders couldn't understand why they were losing so many ships to such small, seemingly insignificant forces. They had never encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything for a chance at survival. The humans had become pests, buzzing around the Draxari's grand designs, cutting into their pride with every successful strike. One night, after a particularly harrowing battle, Mara and her team managed to bring down a Draxari warship. The ship didn't crash. It was brought down with a well-placed shot that pierced its hull, causing an explosion that sent debris raining down onto the colony. The victory was small, but it was enough to send a message. The humans were not done. They were not a species to be erased. As the weeks passed, the Draxari began to recognize the problem they now faced. This was no simple colony. The humans on New Hope were far from helpless, and their resistance was spreading. Mara's name began to echo across the stars, and it wasn't long before the resistance movements in other systems started to take notice. They saw something in the humans of New Hope, a spark. The Draxari had thought the humans were weak, insignificant, and easily crushed. Now, they realized they had made a grave mistake. The humans of New Hope were not just surviving. They were fighting back, and they were beginning to win. News of the human resistance on New Hope spread like wildfire through the galaxy, though it took a while for the message to reach the farthest corners. The Draxari, having underestimated humanity, were too distracted by their conquests elsewhere to pay much attention to a small colony on the edge of known space. But as one victory turned into another, the word finally reached the ears of the oppressed, the forgotten, the alien species who had long been under the heel of the Draxari. And the spark that had ignited on New Hope soon became a fire across the stars. The first to take notice were the Zenthari, a race of nomadic traders with a knack for survival. They had been all but wiped out in the early days of the Draxari conquest. Their planets had been razed, their fleets scattered, and their people enslaved to work in Draxari-controlled mining operations. For years, the Zenthari had endured in silence, biding their time and waiting for any hope of resistance. When they heard about the humans on New Hope, they saw a chance. The Zenthari weren't warriors, but they were clever, and they had been watching the Draxari for a long time. They knew the weaknesses of the invaders' supply chains, their command structures, and their tactics. They reached out, offering their skills in stealth, sabotage, and subversion. Mara Thompson and her team welcomed them with open arms, understanding that they needed every ally they could get. The Zenthari showed the humans how to infiltrate Draxari facilities unnoticed, how to plant disruptions in their communications, and how to disable their supply lines without ever firing a shot. With each successful mission, the human resistance grew bolder, its tactics more refined. But even as the humans and the Zenthari worked together, they knew that the Draxari would soon catch on to the growing rebellion. And when they did, it would be far from a quiet fight. It wasn't long before the Arthrax, a brutal species of warriors with large muscular frames and a long history of battle, joined the alliance. They had once been fierce opponents of the Draxari, but their homeworld had been decimated, their armies crushed under the weight of Draxari military might. Now, the Arthrax were a scattered race, broken but not beaten. They had been watching the rise of the human resistance with growing interest, impressed by their audacity. The Arthrax saw themselves in the humans, an underdog species willing to fight for their freedom, no matter the odds. They offered their strength, their warriors, and their battle experience to the growing cause. With the Arthrax now on their side, the human resistance became a true military force, though still outnumbered and under-equipped compared to the Draxari. But the humans, ever adaptable, had a strength the Draxari couldn't predict: unity. Unlike the Draxari, whose empire was built on fear and control, the humans and their allies fought together as equals, each race contributing its unique skills to the effort. Mara Thompson, who had once been a flight instructor, was now a commander of a mixed-force army, leading her people and their new allies with a conviction that inspired others to join. The ripple effect continued to spread. The resistance movements that had once been isolated began to link up, sharing resources, intelligence, and strategic advice. The Draxari, meanwhile, struggled to keep up with the growing resistance. What had been a swift campaign of conquest now felt like a never-ending war, with each victory leading to more and more uprisings, more sabotage, and more challenges to their rule. Mara knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger. The Draxari would not let this rebellion go unanswered. They would strike back harder, faster, and with greater force. But the humans, now united with their allies, were ready. They were no longer just a small colony on the edge of the galaxy. They were the heart of a rebellion that was shaking the foundations of the Draxari Empire. And no matter how many times they were knocked down, they would get back up. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now it was going to learn that the humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of the stars. As the human resistance continued to grow, so did the realization that they could not defeat the Draxari alone. The alliance between the humans and the Zenthari had already proven effective, but the resistance needed more. They needed strength, military might, and a reach that could stretch across the galaxy. That was when the Arthrax arrived. The Arthrax had long been known for their strength, their warrior culture, and their pride. They had fought the Draxari with fury and ferocity, only to be crushed under the invaders' technological superiority. But the Arthrax were survivors, and they had not forgotten how to fight. In the wake of their defeat, they had scattered across the galaxy, forming small, isolated tribes. They had been waiting for a sign, any sign, that the tide could turn. When the news from New Hope reached them, they saw that sign. The humans weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. The Arthrax sought an opportunity to reclaim their honor, to strike back at the Draxari who had destroyed their homeworlds. Their leader, Korak the Unyielding, was a towering figure known for his ruthless skill in battle and his unwavering loyalty to his people. Mara Thompson met him in a clandestine meeting on a remote moon, unsure what to expect. What she found was a warrior with respect for humanity's will to survive. Korak had watched the humans, learned from their tactics, and admired their resolve. In exchange for their survival, he offered his people strength, their warships, and their knowledge of Draxari battle tactics. For Mara, it was an offer that could not be refused. The Arthrax were now part of the growing alliance. With the Arthrax added to their ranks, the resistance had a powerful army, but strength alone would not win the war. They needed knowledge, and that was where the Lorca came in. The Lorca were a race of brilliant engineers, peaceful by nature, but when the Draxari attacked, they had been forced to defend themselves. Their planets were full of wonders of technology, and their minds were unmatched in the art of building and inventing. The Lorca had watched the rise of the human resistance with growing fascination, impressed not only by the humans' ingenuity, but also by their unity with the other oppressed races. Mara understood that the humans and their allies needed more advanced technology to face the Draxari. And the Lorca could provide that. A representative of the Lorca, a small but sharp-eyed scientist named Frixa, met with Mara in the underground tunnels of New Hope. She was skeptical at first, unsure if the humans could be trusted with the kind of technology the Lorca possessed. But after a series of meetings, it became clear to Frixa that the humans were not conquerors. They were fighters, not for their own gain, but for the survival of everyone who had been oppressed by the Draxari. In exchange for their cooperation, the Lorca provided the Resistance with powerful weapons, advanced shields, and the designs for a new class of starships, ships capable of taking on the Draxari fleet. The Alliance was becoming something far greater than anyone had expected. The Draxari had thought they were invincible, an empire built on fear, brute force, and control. But the humans, the Zenthari, the Arthrax, and the Lorca had one thing the Draxari lacked: the will to fight for something more than themselves. The Draxari had enslaved entire species, wiped out civilizations, but they had never faced an enemy that fought for the future of the galaxy as a whole. As the Alliance prepared for the next phase of their war, Mara Thompson stood before the gathered forces, now a true united front of multiple races, each with its own story of survival and resistance. Together, they were not just a rebellion. They were a force that could reshape the future of the stars. The Draxari would soon learn that no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand against the combined might of a galaxy united by a common cause. And that cause was simple: freedom. The Alliance had grown stronger with each passing day, and so had its resolve. Mara Thompson, now a leader to an entire coalition of species, stood at the helm of a movement that was slowly shifting the balance of power in the galaxy. The Draxari had underestimated humanity, and they were beginning to feel the sting of that mistake. The war was no longer a one-sided affair. It was a battle that could be won. For the first time, the Draxari were no longer certain of their victory. The first major strike was about to take place. Mara and her allies had spent weeks preparing for this day. The Draxari fleet had established a critical stronghold on a planet known as Tormar, a key position in their control of a vital trade route. If the Resistance could take this planet, they would not only strike a blow to the Draxari's military infrastructure, but they would also force them to rethink their strategy. Tormar was well defended, surrounded by a powerful fleet and fortified installations. But that was exactly why the Alliance had chosen it. They were going to hit them where they least expected, right in the heart of their defensive network. The assault plan was bold, almost reckless, but the humans and their allies had learned that sometimes it was better to strike fast and with overwhelming force than to wait for the perfect moment. The Zenthari, with their stealth and cunning, slipped past the Draxari's outer defenses, using their knowledge of the enemy's technology to jam their sensors. The Lorca engineers had designed specialized bombs that could disrupt the Draxari's energy shields, giving the Resistance the edge they needed. The Arthrax, with their massive warships and formidable warriors, would lead the charge on the planet's surface, ensuring that the enemy had nowhere to run. As the first wave of ships launched from New Hope, Mara felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they had all been working toward. Every race, every individual had a stake in this battle. They were no longer fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Resistance fleet plunged into the heart of the Draxari's defenses. The Draxari, caught off guard by the scale and ferocity of the attack, scrambled to respond. Their ships were powerful, yes, but they were not designed for the kind of guerrilla tactics the humans and their allies used. The Zenthari's interference scrambled Draxari communications, preventing them from coordinating their counterattacks effectively. The Lorca's bombs found their mark, disabling key power generators and crippling the Draxari's energy shields. But the real surprise came when the Arthrax broke through the Draxari's outer defenses. The Arthrax warships, massive and heavily armed, were like unstoppable forces of nature. They tore through Draxari fighters with ease, giving the Resistance the edge they needed to land their forces on the planet's surface. The battle raged on for hours, with each faction playing its part. The humans, though outnumbered, fought with a tenacity that had once seemed unimaginable. They held their ground, pressing the Draxari back with every attack. As the sun began to set over the war-torn landscape of Tormar, it became clear that the tide had truly turned. The Draxari's hold on the planet was slipping, their military base collapsing under the weight of the combined assault. Mara stood on the command bridge of one of the resistance ships, watching the battle unfold. She could hardly believe it. This was not just a victory for the humans. It was a victory for every species that had ever been oppressed, every planet that had ever been forced to kneel before the Draxari. And yet Mara knew that this was just the beginning. The Draxari would retaliate, harder than ever before. They would not go down quietly. But for the first time in the war, the resistance had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. The Draxari had underestimated humanity, and now they were going to see just how wrong they had been. Mara's voice crackled through the comms, her words carrying across the fleet. This is only the beginning. We take Tormar today, but we take the galaxy tomorrow. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And now, the Draxari knew what the rest of the galaxy had learned. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. The victory at Tormar had sent shockwaves through the Draxari Empire, and the galaxy had watched in awe as humanity, once thought weak and helpless, began to emerge as a real threat. The Draxari, shaken by the unexpected loss, began to regroup, but there was something they hadn't anticipated: the fractured alliances within their own ranks. The Empire, built on fear and absolute control, had never experienced internal strife of this magnitude. The cracks in their unity were widening, and that made them more dangerous than ever. In the weeks following Tormar, the resistance continued to press its advantage, launching strike after strike on Draxari supply lines and strategic military targets. But Mara Thompson, though triumphant, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Draxari were too quiet. Their fleet, once active and aggressive, had suddenly gone silent. Mara knew that a wounded animal was always the most dangerous. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Then came the news that would change everything. An urgent transmission came through, flagged as a high-priority message from within the resistance itself. It was a betrayal, one of their own. Commander Rylock, a former Draxari military officer who had defected to the resistance years earlier, had been captured by the Draxari, or so it seemed at first. The truth was far darker. Rylock had been brainwashed, reprogrammed by Draxari agents, and turned into a sleeper agent within the human ranks. The Draxari now had access to their most sensitive plans, their strategies, their weaknesses. The galaxy's most dangerous secret was out. Mara felt the sting of betrayal deep in her bones. Rylock had been a trusted ally. His defection had been a turning point in their fight. He had shared invaluable intelligence on Draxari tactics and military structures. How could they have been so blind? The news of his betrayal hit the resistance like a thunderclap, shaking their unity to its core. But Rylock's betrayal was just the beginning. The Draxari had not only gained access to critical resistance information, they also had a key operative within the very heart of the Alliance. With the knowledge he had given them, they were now poised to strike back with terrifying precision. The resistance was about to face an assault like no other. As the Alliance scrambled to tighten security, distrust spread among the ranks. The once unified front began to fracture as whispers of further infiltration spread. Each ally, each race that had joined the cause, began to question the loyalty of those around them. Was there another mole? Who could they trust? Was this the end of the human-led rebellion? Mara knew that the only way to counter the Draxari's next move was to act fast. She had always relied on the strength of her team, the humans, the Zenthari, the Arthrax, and the Lorca. But now she couldn't afford to take any chances. She personally led a team of the most trusted soldiers to track down Rylock, hoping to undo the damage he had done before it was too late. The mission was dangerous, and every step felt like a gamble. Time was running out. The Resistance launched a series of diversionary attacks designed to confuse the Draxari and buy them time. But as Mara and her team closed in on Rylok's last known location, she couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end of the Alliance, or was it a turning point? Could humanity and its allies overcome the betrayal of one of their own? The final confrontation came in the heart of a Draxari-controlled world, a planet built for war. The Draxari, thinking themselves victorious, were preparing for the final strike to crush the Resistance once and for all. Mara and her team infiltrated the heart of the Draxari stronghold, where Rylok, now a puppet of the invaders, awaited them. The battle was fierce, the stakes higher than ever before. Mara's heart raced as she faced the betrayal of her closest ally, but as the fight raged on, she understood the most important lesson of all. The war was far from over, and the Draxari had just made their greatest mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit, even in the face of betrayal, even when hope seemed lost. The Resistance would rise again. The Resistance was wounded, but not broken. The betrayal by Rylok had shaken them to their core, leaving them vulnerable, but it had also sparked a renewed sense of urgency. Mara Thompson, though reeling from the loss of a trusted ally, understood the gravity of the situation. The Draxari, emboldened by their momentary advantage, were preparing to unleash a devastating final blow. They would not make the same mistake again. This was their last chance to crush the rebellion before it spread too far. The Resistance had to act, and they had to act fast. In the wake of Rylok's betrayal, the Alliance had pulled together. Mara knew that they couldn't afford any more secrets, any more betrayals. They had to unite, every race, every species, every fighter who had pledged to free the galaxy from Draxari tyranny. It was no longer about the survival of humanity alone. It was about the survival of every free species in the galaxy. The time had come for a final push. Mara gathered her allies, the Zenthari, who had worked tirelessly behind enemy lines to disrupt Draxari communications, the Arthrax, their warriors ready for one last battle to avenge the devastation of their homeworlds, the Lorca, whose technological prowess had given the Resistance the tools they needed to fight a superior foe. Together, they would strike at the heart of the Draxari Empire. At the nerve center of their military command, a heavily fortified station located in the system's heart. The plan was audacious. The Resistance would infiltrate the Draxari stronghold, disable their command structures, and cripple their fleet. But there was a catch. The station was shielded by a series of advanced energy defenses, a system that no one, not even the Lorca engineers, had been able to crack. They would need to find another way through, something that the Draxari would never see coming. For days, the Resistance worked in secret, building what could only be described as a one-way ticket into the heart of the Draxari stronghold, a decoy. They had learned enough from the Draxari's patterns, their strengths and weaknesses, to know that the invaders could be tricked. The plan hinged on creating enough chaos to scatter their forces and open a window for the main assault. But as with every battle, Mara knew that sacrifices would be made. This would not be an easy fight, and not everyone would make it out alive. As the final assault began, Mara's heart was heavy. The decoy had done its job, and the Resistance fleet had entered the system with alarming speed. The Draxari were caught off guard, scrambling to mount a defense. Ships collided in the chaos, and explosions filled the air as Resistance fighters engaged the Draxari fleet in the largest space battle the galaxy had seen in centuries. The Zenthari's stealth ships darted between Draxari lines, creating confusion and forcing the enemy to abandon their formations. On the surface of the station, the Arthrax warriors led the charge, their massive frames cutting through Draxari defenses like a force of nature. It was a brutal, bloody battle. Every inch of ground was fought for, every hallway contested. The Draxari fought with relentless discipline, but the Arthrax were relentless in their own way, pushing forward with a fury that no amount of enemy fire could slow. Mara, leading a group of elite soldiers, pushed through the heart of the station toward its central control room. She could feel the weight of every step, knowing that they were getting closer to ending the Draxaries' reign of terror. The final confrontation was near, and everything had come down to this moment. As they reached the command center, the door to the room slid open with a hiss. The Draxari commander awaited them, his towering form waiting in the shadows. But Mara was not afraid. She had fought too hard, lost too much, to let fear stand in her way. She looked around at the faces of her team, tired, battered, but resolute. This was the moment when the galaxy would either fall to the Draxari or rise in defiance. She wasn't about to let it fall. The battle that ensued in the command room was like no other, a clash of wills, a clash of everything the Resistance had fought for. The Draxari commander fought with all the might of his empire, but he had underestimated humanity and its allies. With a final decisive blow, the commander fell, and the station's command center fell into the hands of the Resistance. It wasn't over, not yet, but the tide had turned. The Draxari were no longer invincible, and for the first time, the Resistance knew that victory was within reach. The final push had begun, and this time, the galaxy would not be denied its freedom. The Draxari command center fell silent as the last echoes of battle faded into the background. Mara stood over the Draxari commander, her breath steady despite the chaos of the previous hours. The victory was theirs. But it wasn't just about this one battle. It was about something far greater. The galaxy, once on the brink of complete subjugation, was now on the precipice of rebirth. The station's control systems flickered to life, and the Resistance quickly took control. It was a monumental moment, seizing the nerve center of the Draxari Empire itself. Every communication line, every security system, every strategic decision point in their entire fleet now rested in the hands of the Alliance. The combined might of the humans, the Zenthari, the Arthrax, and the Lorca had done what was once thought impossible. They had crippled the Draxari from within, breaking their grip on the galaxy. But the war was far from over. Mara knew that the Draxari, though shaken, would not surrender without one final desperate counterattack. Their empire was vast, their military resources immense. They would regroup, rebuild, and attempt to crush the rebellion with all the power they had left. Yet the Resistance had already proven that they could stand against the Draxari's might. The galaxy had seen what humanity, alongside its allies, was capable of. And for the first time, the galaxy's oppressed could see a future without the Draxari's iron fist. Mara activated the station's communication array, sending out a broadcast across the stars, from the outer rim to the core worlds. It was a message of hope, a call to all who had been living in fear. "This is Commander Mara Thompson of the United Galactic Resistance." Her voice rang out, strong and clear. "The Draxari Empire has fallen. No longer will we live in the shadow of oppression. The galaxy is free. We fought for this, not as separate worlds, but as a united force. Today, we take our future back." The message spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the galaxy, igniting sparks of rebellion in places that had long given up hope. Across war-torn planets, oppressed colonies, and forgotten systems, people began to rise up. The Draxari's once unshakable power was now crumbling under the weight of 1,000 defiant voices. Mara's eyes fell to the view screen before her, where the combined fleet of the Resistance ships, alongside the Draxari warships they had reclaimed or captured, hovered in space. It was an armada that represented the strength of every species that had stood together. The Arthrax, once scattered and broken, now fought beside the Zenthari, their warships gleaming under the distant stars. The Lorca, engineers of unimaginable intellect, had built ships and weapons that could stand toe-to-toe with the Draxari's finest, and humanity, which had once been the underdog, had become the catalyst for the revolution. Mara felt a surge of pride as she realized the weight of what they had accomplished. It was a momentous victory, but it was also just the beginning of something much larger. The Resistance, once fragmented and small, had evolved into a united force capable of reshaping the galaxy. The Draxari, though a formidable foe, had failed to understand one thing. They were not fighting isolated species. They were fighting for the future of the stars themselves. The next phase of the war would be to push the remaining Draxari forces out of the galaxy's key systems. Their infrastructure would be dismantled, their fleets destroyed, their leadership eradicated. The Alliance would rebuild, not just in terms of military strength, but in terms of unity. A new order would rise, one founded on freedom, cooperation, and equality. Mara turned to her allies, Xanthari, Arthrax, Lorca, and the humans who had stood with her from the beginning. There was no fear in their eyes, no doubt in their hearts. The galaxy was theirs to shape. Together, they had fought for the stars. And together, they would forge a future where every race, every world, had the chance to thrive. The dawn of a new galaxy had arrived. A galaxy where the strength of the many would forever outshine the tyranny of the few. And as Mara stood amidst her people, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The stars were waiting for them.